Did you get it? Mm-hmm. Next up is Senate Bill 1156, which would amend the Code of Virginia relating to sanctuary policies. The bill is reported to the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns with an amendment.
The delegate from Franklin, Delegate Poindexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would move the committee amendment.
Delegate Simon, do you want to talk on the committee amendment or on the bill?
Mr. Speaker, I'm looking at this, but I think there's a floor amendment also. Am I misreading that in LIS? No floor amendment?
All I see is the committee amendment.
Yes, I'd like to speak to the, well, yes, before we get to the amendment, I'd like to, would the gentleman yield for a question?
The delegate yield for a question on the amendment, on the committee amendment.
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate yields.
Actually, we can do the amendment first, Mr. Speaker.
You want me to adopt that?
Okay.
Motion's on the committee amendment. All those in favor of adopting the committee amendment will say aye. All those opposed, no. That commitment is adopted. Will you yield for a question from Delegate Simon on the?
I yield.
Okay, delegate yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, this bill is not identical to your House Bill 2270, but it's very similar. Is that right?
I would say to the gentleman they're similar.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, this bill did not
Delegate would like to ask another question.
The gentleman yield for an additional question?
Delegate yield for another question.
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate yields.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentleman, this bill did not go through the vetting process in militia, police, and public safety, where we generally hear bills that affect sheriff's offices and law enforcement and so those sorts of things. And it also did not get to be heard by courts of justice, which his bill was. Does the gentleman have any idea why it was that this only went through county, cities, and towns and not those other committees?
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman the bill was simply assigned to the committee and it went to the subcommittee and the committee added the amendment and the bill's on the floor now.
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, this bill deals with issues of what law enforcement agencies can and can't do. It has to do with prohibiting a practice whereby they would be liable for enacting policies that may have the intention of being counter to federal policies on immigration. I don't know that these issues have really been thoroughly looked at, that the words have been carefully considered the way we were able to consider the gentleman's bill when it came through the House in both the Militia, Police, and the Courts Committee. And so for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I would move that the bill be re-referred.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Delegate from Shenandoah.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Delegate has the floor.
I believe the gentleman was arguing and is now making a motion. I don't believe that's in order.
You're talking to your motion, I take it.
Speaking to my motion, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate has the floor.
Okay, so as I was saying, speaking to the motion, Mr. Speaker, would be that we refer this bill to the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety. And speaking to that bill for the reasons I previously had laid out, this bill deals with issues that I think are significant to how sheriff's offices and federal law enforcement cooperate. The gentleman's bill, which had different words in it, was carefully considered by both Militia, Police, and Public Safety and the Courts Committee. This bill hasn't had that opportunity to be vetted by the folks that are sort of have that subject matter expertise. And so I think it would benefit the whole body if this bill had the opportunity to be viewed by the appropriate committees that have subject matter. So that's the purpose of the motion, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Franklin, Delegate Poindexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the body, I would oppose any move of the bill back to subcommittee. County, cities, and towns addresses issues with towns, cities, counties, policies, sheriffs, law enforcement, etc. So I would oppose any move to that bill.
Delegate from Arlington, Delegate Lopez, speaking to the motion to re-refer to militia and police and public safety.
Oh, not move it at a later time, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, the motion by Delegate Simon is to refer the bill to the Militia, Police, and Public Safety Committee. All those in favor of that motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no.
No.
The noes have it. The bill is still before us. Okay. The ayes and nays, they're sufficient. Shall the bill be referred to the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety? Clerk will close the floor.
Ayes 48, noes 51.
Ayes 48, noes 51. That motion is defeated. Delegate from Franklin, Delegate Poindexter.
Describe the bill, Mr. Speaker. Describe the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
The language in this bill is somewhat different from a couple of years ago, but it goes through the same general tone. I'll read the language. No locality shall adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy intended to restrict the enforcement of federal immigration laws. You'll note that that does not mandate any affirmative collaboration with ICE. And what it really does, though, it prohibits localities from affirmatively acting to impede the enforcement of federal immigration laws. And I would note that we have law enforcement coordination across the board, as has been described in other times on this floor. Mr. Speaker, this is an appropriate bill for Virginia, and I move the bill pass.
Delegate from Arlington, Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Speaker. Here we go again. Here we go again. Yeah. This bill ignores the complicated nature of federal immigration law and requires localities to choose between complying with an ICE detainer or unlawfully detaining someone past their release days. We humbly disagree on 287G agreements that are voluntary currently. This bill, we believe, would make them mandatory. This bill makes our communities less safe by undermining the community policing efforts that we pride ourselves on and work so hard to build. This bill, for so many communities with large immigrant and new American populations, makes it harder to support community policing efforts that build trust between police and the community. Just in my district alone, in 2017, the first 8 months of 2017, 75% decrease in the number of domestic violence reports in immigrant and new American communities, 85% decrease in the number of sexual violence reports from immigrant and new American communities. Are these things not happening? No, of course they're happening, but people are too scared to report them to the local police because they might get caught up in the ICE detention process. The combination of the Dillon Rule and existing state mandates make the existence of sanctuary localities, which we keep hearing about from the other side of the aisle, a legal impossibility in the Commonwealth. The burden of the federal enforcement agency should not be placed on local jurisdictions. Forcing localities to act as a substitute for federal agents places additional and undue demands on resources, taking time and resources away from police and that should be spent on public safety and enforcement. Also, ICE usually does not reimburse localities for holding individuals past when they otherwise would be released. Ultimately, we all know that this bill is unnecessary, costly localities, and could make us less safe by undermining our community policing efforts. Let's be clear. Let's be very clear. This bill is really about dog whistle politics, created to stoke fear of the other and division and the idea that those who are different, new Americans and immigrants, well, you're unwelcome. This kind of legislation doesn't create one job or educate one child or help a family in any way. It will drain money from our localities and send the worst kind of message about Virginia. Please vote no.
Delegate from Virginia Beach, Delegate Yaris.
Mr. Speaker, speak to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
I've not spoken up on much legislation, but I felt the compelled need to speak on this, partially because when I hear terms like dog whistle politics, it affects me greatly. My favorite thing to do as a delegate, Mr. Speaker, is several times a year I go to the federal courthouse in Norfolk and I speak to a naturalization ceremony. And I tell these folks that it is the greatest honor of my life to be the first to welcome them into our American family. My earliest childhood memory was as a child seeing my mother take that oath of allegiance. And that is an incredibly powerful moment. For those that don't know, when you stand in that courthouse and you say these words, I hereby declare an oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, of whom or which I have hereto been a subject or citizen, that I will support and defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by law, that I will perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by law, that I will perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by law, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me God. I have stood in that courthouse several times, and it is one of the most profound moments to see these new members of the new American family. It's the last thing they do. How moving and how powerful it is. And I have seen U.S. attorneys remove people from that body who will not recite that oath. It is an incredibly powerful moment. We allow, as a country, 1 million legal immigrants a year. 1 million. There is not a country on this planet that allows that number of illegal immigrants a year. We are a nation of second chances. That's part of who we are. And I am a firm believer in being that second chance. But I also am a firm believer in being a nation of laws and not men. And I have to say that when I hear terms like dog whistle politics, when this simply is telling localities not to impede the federal government from obeying the law, that to me is astonishing. As somebody who is a child of an immigrant, who every chance I get goes to speak at a naturalization ceremony, I have to say I completely reject that characterization of this bill, and it's a pleasure of the House to pass the measure.
Delegate from Alexandria, Doug Levine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is indeed a moving account my friend from Virginia Beach has given. And I agree, we are a nation of immigrants, and those are very powerful moments. The question, though, is on this legislation. And the question is, the legislation says that it prohibits localities from intending to restrict the enforcement of federal immigration law. Can localities restrict federal immigration law? Well, the Constitution of the United States, Article 6, Clause 2, says the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuant thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So can a locality overturn or restrict federal law? They can't. So the bill clearly isn't needed, as well as being unwise. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Shenandoah, Delegate Gilbert.
Speaking to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate has the floor.
Speaking most specifically, Mr. Speaker, to the implication, frankly, that many of us have grown tired of, that just because we favor something as simple and clear as the rule of law, that we are racist. And that is what was just uttered on this floor with the term dog whistle politics. For the last week, we have heard, by implication, suggestions that we are racist in some respect or another. And I am tired of it, Mr. Speaker. And if our friends in the Democratic caucus want to talk about racism, they need to clean up their own house first. And we're waiting for you to do that.
Delegate from Caroline, Delegate Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move the pending question.
Delegate Orrock moves the pending question. Those in favor of that motion will say aye. All those opposed, no. That motion carries. Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 51, noes 47.
Ayes 51, noes 47. The bill passes.